Appearance on Dion's Daily Dose does not imply endorsement from or by any candidate or guest. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed by Dion Bergeron or Dion's Daily Dose are his own and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of any guest. Material and information presented is for general information purposes only. The Dion's Daily Dose name in all forms and abbreviations are the property of its owners, and its use does not imply endorsement of or opposition to any specific organization, product, or service. If you'd like to support the show, please visit our Patreon at patreon.com/Dion's Daily Dose.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Dion's Daily Dose. Welcome to the new viewers out there. I'm Dion.
And I'm Shawn.
And this is Face to Face, where we talk about various goings on. Lately, we've been talking about the Supreme Court. Specifically, right now, we have what I think is an extremely interesting trial going on. And it's about presidential immunity. Its lawfare against President Trump has been taken to the newest heights, never before seen in the U.S. history. Have they gone after a president,
a former president? But yes,
nevertheless, for crimes, quote crimes, that they say he committed in office. This is we're in uncharted territory.
Yep.
So. I think, C-SPAN did a breakdown.
Yep, they did.
Of the presidential immunity arguments, the various attorneys and justices. We've done this before, but this one we like because it shows who's speaking.
Yeah, it makes it a lot easier.
It makes it a lot easier. So we are going to jump in and give our little take. We'll leave the names up here. Again, I'm Dion.
And I'm Shawn.
And we're going to get right into it. So currently, starting off, this is Dion Shawn. He's Trump's attorney, and he's speaking to the Supreme Court.
Without presidential immunity from criminal prosecution, there can be no presidency as we know it.
His novel theory would immunize former presidents for criminal liability for bribery, treason, sedition, murder, and here conspiring to use fraud to overturn the results of an election and perpetuate himself in power.
Framers did not put an immunity clause into the Constitution. They knew how to. There were immunity clauses in some state constitutions. They knew how to give legislative immunity. They didn't provide immunity to the president. And, not so...
We'll pause it there. This is Justice Elena Kagan speaking. And I got to admit, that's a good point. They specifically excluded presidential immunity.
Yeah.
When they knew how to include it, they included several instances of immunity in the founding documents, right?
They did in the founding documents, but later on, they actually added it, and it's part of the 14th Amendment, where the Privileges and Immunities Clause guarantees all citizens, including former slaves, that they have fundamental rights protected in all states. Examples of these privileges and immunities include life, liberty, and property, the right to sue, right of protection of the federal marshal, right to run for federal office, and vote in federal elections. The main purpose of the Privileges and Immunity Clause is to protect the rights of citizens to travel between states. Privileges and immunities are the fundamental rights given to the citizens of America.
Okay, so it does talk about immunities from various things.
But
interesting.
Not in the founding documents. It came later with the 14th Amendment.
The 14th Amendment talks about it, codifies it, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see what Justice Kagan says.
So surprising. They were reacting against a monarch who claimed to be above the law. Wasn't the whole point that the president was not a monarch and the president was not supposed to be above the law?
I would say two things in response to that.
Okay, so this Kagan asked this, and Sauer is responding.
Yep.
Immunity, they did put an immunity clause in a sense. They put in the executive vesting clause, which was originally understood to adopt a broad immunity principle that's set forth in the very broad language of Marbury against Madison. And also, they did discuss and consider what would be the checks on the presidency? And they did not say, oh, we need to have criminal prosecution. Right there at the Constitutional Convention, Benjamin Franklin says, we don't have that. That's not an option. Everybody cried out against that as unconstitutional. The structural check we're adopting is impeachment. And they're very clear on that in pages 64 to 69 of the second volume of Farron.
If the
Okay, now that actually is a very interesting point. According to him, the founding fathers were wholeheartedly against presidential immunity. As a matter of fact, that's the point of the impeachment clause, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, making them essentially able to be deposed or removed from office in case of doing nefarious things.
But what they're talking about now is something beyond impeachment. See, the whole thing they were talking during this is official acts or personal acts. So that's what the court's going to have to decide is there a difference? And if there is a difference, should they both be punished or one or the other?
Right. And
so we'll see.
It's a really good point. And one of the things that I think, I guess, for lack of a better term, the left, the rabid anti-Trumpers, one of the things that they're really like excited about in this trial is the potential for Trump to be gotten on something, anything, right? But I think they're forgetting the idea of precedent.
Yeah.
And this is a huge case as far as precedents go, because if they unlock the door to presidential prosecution, they're all able to be prosecuted.
And then in a little bit with the case, it's going to talk about when Obama actually killed an American citizen in Yemen because he was working with Al Qaeda.
Right.
And his son got involved, was with him in the car when they drone attacked him. So,
did the son survive?
No. The 16-year-old son was killed. And then another, I can't remember the guy's name, but there was a third person that was an American citizen in that car that was killed.
So 3 Americans were assassinated by a sitting U.S. president, and they're going to bring that up in a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's clip.
Yep. So going back to the clip, this is Justice Sotomayor now speaking.
President decides that his rival is a corrupt person, and he orders the military or orders someone to assassinate him. Is that within his official acts for which he can get immunity?
It would depend on the hypothetical, but we can see that could well be an official act.
It could, and why? Because he's doing it for personal reasons. He's not doing it like President Obama is alleged to have done it, to protect the...
There's no alleged. Like, I know they have to say that, but like, he did it. Like,
he did.
Yeah.
He ordered the drone strike.
Yeah, he ordered it. That's what the president ultimately did. Anyway.
Country from a terrorist. He's doing it to have done it, to protect the country from a terrorist. He's doing it for personal gain. And isn't that the nature of the allegations here? That he's not doing these acts in furtherance of an official responsibility. He's doing it for personal gain.
I'm going to pause it there because I think one thing that's interesting is her framing of the question. I don't know if you picked up on this, but she basically made the assumption that it was done for the good of the country, right? That's her argument, that assassinating these American citizens on foreign soil with a drone strike was done in the war against terrorism. So it's okay. That's how it came. That's very much how it came out.
And Senator Rand Paul, after this happened, actually did a 12-hour filibuster on the Senate floor, wanting answers, asking the question, can a president kill an American citizen on American soil, or do they have to be on foreign soil? He wanted those questions answered, and he really never got an answer. Like, they did a memo and released in 2014, but those questions still really haven't been answered yet.
Right. It's absolutely, and it's frustrating. It's frustrating as a citizen to see our government so far out of control, in my opinion, that the sitting U.S. president can order the assassination of an American citizen, not take him into custody and give him a trial, but kill him.
Or they can also detain you indefinitely.
Right. Then that's, Patriot Act stuff. And
That's the NDAA that passed in 2015. I believe it was 2015.
okay. Yeah. Doing just briefly on that.
If they deem you a terrorist, they can hold you for as long as they want.
Right. Right. And
it hasn't been used many times, but it's been used on the January 6th protesters.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that's very unconstitutional.
It is. It is. And unfortunately, we have seen such basically the trashing of our Constitution by our government. And I'm not just talking federal. We got many instances of state and local governments doing it too. But the focus right now, SCOTUS and the president. And we have seen the president all but urinating on the Constitution, especially in recent years. It's frustrating as an American taxpayer to see these politicians do acts like this, assassinate an American citizen or take you into custody indefinitely, both strict violations of the American Constitution. So when someone like Rand Paul demands accountability and says, hey, what the heck? Crickets and the clink of silverware is all we get.
And that's why I like Rand Paul is he keeps the government accountable.
Yes. Yeah. I will say you can disagree with the man in a few minor areas. And I do. I think agreeing with someone 100% on everything is creepy. Like it's really weird.
The only person you're going to agree with 100% is hopefully yourself.
Right. Yeah. And even then, there's some questions. I mean, so back to the trial here. Let's
the hearing.
Sotomayor. The hearing.
I agree with that characterization of the indictment, and that confirms immunity.
You concede that private acts don't get immunity.
We do.
Okay. So in the special counsel's brief on pages 46 and 47, he
This is Justice Barrett.
urges us, even if we were to decide or assume that there was some sort of immunity for official acts, that there were sufficient private acts in the indictment for the case to go back and the trial to begin immediately. And I want to know if you agree or disagree about the characterization of these acts as private. Petitioner turned to a private attorney, was willing to spread knowingly false claims of election fraud to spearhead his challenges to the election results. Private?
As alleged. I mean, we dispute the allegation, but
Of
that
course.
sounds private to me.
Sounds private. Petitioner conspired with another private attorney who caused the filing in court of a verification signed by petitioner that contained false allegations to support a challenge.
That
Private.
also sounds private.
3 private actors, 2 attorneys, including those mentioned above, and a political consultant helped implement a plan to submit fraudulent slates of presidential electors to obstruct the certification proceeding, and petitioner and a co-conspirator attorney directed that effort.
You read it quickly. I believe that's
Yeah.
private. I don't want to.
So those acts you would not dispute. Those were private, and you wouldn't raise a claim that they were official.
As characterized, what we would say, Your Honor, if I may, what we would say is official is things like meeting with the Department of Justice to deliberate about who's going to be the acting Attorney General of the United States.
Sure.
Communicating with the American public, communicating with Congress about matters of enormous.
Thank you. Thank you.
So let me put this worry on.
Okay, I'm going to pause it just for a moment so that I can kind of expound a little bit. The key issue here that I believe that Barrett is raising is, and it does go back to Sotomayor as well, is what are official acts versus private acts. Official acts are those covered under the understanding or current, I guess, allowance of presidential immunity, right? We've always kind of operated under the assumption that president, whatever he does in office, that's what the impeachment system is there for if he does something dumb. But in this case, they're talking about acts not done officially as president, but rather as a private citizen, but that are potentially still illegal or subversive.
Yeah.
Especially in this case. So that's kind of the key issue at hand, because according to Sotomayor, basically everything done under the official umbrella, including up to and including assassination of American citizens is perfectly fine. It's when you act as a private citizen that all of a sudden we have problems.
On the table. If the potential for criminal liability is taken off the table, wouldn't there be a significant risk that future presidents would be emboldened to commit crimes with abandon while they're in office. It's right now the fact that we're having this debate because OLC has said that presidents might be prosecuted. Presidents from the beginning of time have understood that that's a possibility. That might be what has kept this office from turning into the kind of crime center that I'm envisioning. But once we say no criminal liability, Mr. President, you can do whatever you want, I'm worried that we would have a worse problem than the problem of the president feeling constrained to follow the law while he's in office.
I respectfully disagree with that because
it is a valid question.
It is.
And I don't like Ketanji Brown Jackson, but that's for many of the answers that she gave. But anyway, but that's a good question. And it comes down to, is this something that by basically overturning this rock and opening this, she's asking what we already talked about. This is going to set a dangerous precedent insofar as if we decide that presidential immunity pretty much covers everything, then the next president, holy crap, dude, they're going to be unhinged and there's nothing we can do about it. Save for the impeachment process.
Yeah, that would be the only.
Yeah, the only way to do it. And if you have a corrupt Congress, like we've seen, then especially if they hold the majority, there's going to be some wild times.
The regime you've described is the regime we've operated under for 234 years.
The Court of Appeals below, whose decision we're reviewing, said, quote, a former president can be prosecuted for his official acts because the fact of the prosecution means that the former president has allegedly acted in defiance of the laws. Do you agree with that statement?
This is Roberts.
Well, I think it sounds total.
This guy with the kind of squeaky voice is Michael Dreeben. He's the Justice Department counselor to special counsel, essentially the prosecutor.
Yeah.
This is the guy who's bringing the case and saying, President Trump was mean to me. No, I'm just kidding. It's a little more than that, but
I don't like him.
I'm not a fan. Put it that way.
True, but I think it sounds tautologically true, but I want to underscore that the obligation of a president is to take care that the laws are faithfully executed.
Well, I think it sounds tautologically true as well, and that, I think, is the clearest statement of the court's holding, which is why it concerns me. As I read it, it says simply, a former president can be prosecuted because he's being prosecuted.
Well, I would not suggest that that's either the proper approach in this case or certainly not the government's approach. A prosecution does, of course, invoke federal criminal law. The allegations have to be presented to a grand jury, which votes upon the indictment.
Well, that's what I mean, shortly after that statement in the court, that court's opinion, that's what they said. But there's no reason to worry because the prosecutor will act in good faith. And there's no reason to worry because a grand jury will have returned the indictment.
Now, I'm going to pause it there because I think that's really, really important for once from Roberts. Not for once. He does have some good takes. I'm not a huge fan, but he has his moments. And I think this is one of them because if you take it at face value, right, trust the process is in place. Well, but what if it's not a trustworthy process? What if we have a hell-bent prosecutor that doesn't care about real law? And what if you have a grand jury pool that doesn't actually represent a jury of your peers, but is rather a group of activists, anti-whomever? Like, think about, let's just do a complete role reversal here, right? Let's imagine for a moment that we're putting Biden on trial. Okay. And you went to the deepest red area you could find and got a bunch of good old boys to sit on the jury, what you would consider, I guess, your far right, your pickup trucks, your American flags, your Trump flags, your more tears biatch type people, right? And you put them in a jury pool and you brought these quote charges against Biden, how many of those people do you think would legitimately look at all the evidence to figure out whether it was actually something? Or how many do you, I think most of them would be like, hell yeah, get that son bitch.
Yeah.
And I'm one of them. I mean, I'm just saying, right? I'm a little more, like, you guys know, I'm a little more factual. Let's look at the facts. Let's look at everything. But most people, if given the opportunity, are going to go, you know, kind of ham wild in that situation. This is what they've done with Trump. They've taken a pool of jurors from what I consider to be the most far left possible area, Washington, D.C.
New York City.
New York City. I mean, Atlanta, Georgia. These are all serious Democrat strongholds.
Yeah.
And they've taken people who have a natural bias, who read CNN, watch MSNBC and Rachel Maddow, and they believe what these people tell them, despite the fact that they've been wrong so many times.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the system is broken. And I think without saying it, Roberts is saying that without coming out and saying it, because he's asking them, the process is supposed to work like this, but what happens when it doesn't?
And that's due to the polarization of the courts and of everything else. Everything is political.
Absolutely. And I think one of the interesting things that I just learned personally, did you know that in Marion County, the judges are not elected, they're appointed?
Yeah, I did.
I didn't know that. And just a recent thing that I discovered, it's like that in a lot of areas, especially urban areas like New York and Indianapolis and Chicago. They forego elections. The people that you elect appoint people to appoint judges.
And that's how they do it. I'm not comparing. I guess I am comparing. It kind of, China does that too.
Yeah. It's unelected bureaucracy that starts to run things.
They have a huge bureaucracy.
Yes. And ultimately you end up with officials and judges that are unelected. So they're unanswerable to the public. And it creates a situation where you get these, what I would call activist judges that are more interested in pushing certain ideologies than actually following the law.
And that's one thing that people say about Roberts is he does not like activist judges, and he's not an activist judge.
That I will agree with. And I had a candidate on running for office who said that Roberts was his favorite judge, and I recoiled in horror. But he said because of the fact that he's very hands-off when it comes to the law, he doesn't like to make a lot of changes. He tends to rest on precedents and the belief that the Supreme Court should handle as little as possible.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's the job of the Supreme Court to handle these things and get them decided.
Like everything else, it's the balance. You have to have a good balance.
And unfortunately, in our justice system, where the balance has been shifted, the scales have greatly tipped. So going back.
Now, you know how easy it is in many cases for a prosecutor to get a grand jury to bring an indictment. And
I'm going to pause it there. There's a famous quote that says, give me a grand jury and I can indict a ham sandwich.
Yep.
Who said that? Do you remember?
I don't remember.
I don't remember right now, but I'm going to look it up while this plays.
Okay.
Because, but it is an actual quote.
Yep, I've heard that.
It is absolutely true. Again, if you have people that are predisposed to hate who you're bringing an indictment against, or at minimum, there are those people, and this goes a little deeper than I want to get into right now, but there are those people who believe that their job is to hand the prosecutor an indictment when they sit on the grand jury. That's their entire, they believe that. Because the prosecutor taught them that. We have lost our way when it comes to what the grand jury was originally designed for. So, but we'll get into that another time.
All right.
Reliance on the good faith of the prosecutor may not be enough in the some cases. I'm not suggesting here. So if it's tautological, and those are the only protections that the Court of Appeals below gave, and that is no longer your position, you're not defending that position, why shouldn't we either send it back to the Court of Appeals or issue an opinion making clear that that's not the law?
Well, I am defending the Court of Appeals judgment, and I do think that there are layered safeguards that the court can take into account that will ameliorate concerns about unduly chilling presidential conduct. That concerns us.
If an incumbent who loses a very close, hotly contested election
You looked it up too.
knows that a real possibility after leaving office is not that the president is going to be able to go off into a peaceful retirement, but that the president may be criminally prosecuted by a bitter political opponent. Will
That's a
that
good point
not
too.
lead us into a cycle that destabilizes the functioning of our country as a democracy? And we can look around the world and find countries where we have seen this process, where the loser gets thrown in jail.
I think it's exactly the opposite, Justice Alito. There are lawful mechanisms to contest the results in an election. And
Are there though? Here's the thing, and I'm just real quick because we're kind of getting long-winded. I do that, but real quick, didn't they try that? I remember they sent all these cases to trial in various courts.
They did.
And
they lost almost all of them.
Right. But how did they, quote, lose them? They didn't lose them. They were tossed. They were said, no standing, no standing, no standing. We're not going to hear the case because the person who it affected isn't bringing the charges. Even when the people, Brunson, brought it, they still said no. So where is the proper avenue for litigating this?
Also, for some reason, I don't know. I don't want to get too much into this because it's a different topic.
Yeah.
But when that was going on, Rudy Giuliani and what's that woman's name would say something in public, and then when she'd get in court, she'd say something completely different.
Yeah. What's her name?
I guess it does.
The Kraken lady.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. Release the Kraken.
So, but in a way, yeah, you're right. The only recourse really is to try to go to court and see what would happen.
As far as Giuliani and the Release the Kraken lady, I have my own take on that, but we'll do it in another episode. Moving on.
Outside the record, but I think of public knowledge, petitioner and his allies filed dozens of electoral challenges, and my understanding is lost all but one that was not outcome determinative in any respect. There were judges that said in order to sustain substantial claims of fraud that would overturn an election result that's certified by a state, you need evidence, you need proof. And none of those things were manifested. So there is an appropriate way to challenge things through the courts with evidence. If you lose.
And I'll say this real quick about every time they tried to submit evidence, the court wouldn't accept it. So there was evidence of sketchy happenings, but every time it was attempted to be, I guess, entered into evidence, there were issues. However, I think this guy got beat up when he was a kid.
Maybe.
He gives me that impression of that kid who always thought he was smarter than everyone else. And so he would walk around with like that kind of chip on his shoulder, but he was like little with that mousy voice and the big horn rimmed glasses. I could be wrong. Maybe he was, a successful football player, but he gives me that,
Yeah, I've never heard of him before this.
Me either.
Lose, you accept the results. That has been the nation's experience. I think the court is well familiar with that.
Thank you.
That's the concern going forward, is that the system will, when former presidents are subject to prosecution, and the history of Morrison versus Olson tells us it's not going to stop. It's going to cycle back and be used against the current president or the next president and the next president and the next president after that. All that, I want you to try to allay that concern. Why is this not Morrison v. Olson redux if we agree with you?
Well,
Are you familiar with the case he just quoted?
I'm not. I probably should have.
Morrison or
I think
Molson?
he said Molson and Olson.
Molson v.
Olson?
Is this not Morrison v. Olson Redux?
Morrison v. Olson. Redux.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
We'll have to look that up. You want to
Okay.
make a note, Morrison v. Olson, and we'll check into that. But moving on.
If we agree with you.
Well, first of all, the independent counsel regime did have many structural features that emphasized independence at the expense of accountability. We don't have that regime now, but even under that regime, Justice Kavanaugh, I think if you look at Lawrence Walsh's report on Iran-Contra, I think this goes to a very fundamental point for the court to consider.
Okay, you found it?
Yeah, I did. You want to hear it?
Yeah, please.
All right. It was a case that went before the Supreme Court in 1988, and it determined that the Independent Counsel Act was constitutional. Morrison also set important precedent determining the scope of Congress's ability to encumber the president's authority to remove officers of the United States from office. It also... Okay, so I kind of remember this because there was a controversy in like 2007 when then President Bush, I think it was President Bush, fired all the, you know how the attorney general's things work, that there's U.S. special attorneys, or like there's attorney general, like people underneath the attorney general.
Yeah, like the deputies in various, it goes into like departments and then several.
Well, he fired all the people.
Oh, he cleared them out.
Cleared them out in 2007. And so that, when it was ruled, I guess they used that as precedent, but this case was in 1988.
Okay, all right. So it was basically...
basically saying special counsels are constitutional.
Okay.
When they have a special counsel.
Okay, all right. And so he's basically asking...
Independent counsel.
Yeah, what I take from this is the justice is asking, hasn't this already been litigated via this case already? How is this not a rehash of that, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Judge Walsh said, I investigated these matters. The proof did not nearly come close to establishing criminal violations. So we've lived from Watergate through the present, through the independent counsel era with all of its flaws, without these prosecutions having gone off on a runaway train.
To watch this entire oral argument, visit cspan.org.
All right, I think that's it. So, yeah, just a couple of minutes to wrap this up.
Okay. How I think it's just going to determine on what is an official act and what's a personal act.
Yeah, and I think that's really what it's going to come down to. So if they determine that basically official acts are all covered under impeachment, right? You do something in a quote official capacity. But what delineates between official and personal?
Yeah.
And so if they determine that, okay, if your personal acts as president that are, incorrect or illegal, unlawful, whatever word you want to use, are, what's the method for dealing with that is apparently criminal prosecution under this statute that they're going to be ruling. Now, if that comes about, if they go, yeah, okay, this is prosecutable, then it's going to throw that door open for all the previous presidents to be tried for things they did while in office that weren't, quote, official acts. And I don't know about you, but I can name several that fall under that umbrella.
Like President Bush even doing the Iraq War. I wonder if that would even...
Right, because conceivably, especially if they can prove there was no evidence of WMDs, like we now know. So that really wasn't for the country. That was for whatever personal reason. It opens up a massive can of worms.
It also opens up for Bill Clinton for his paying off people. I wonder if that
Right, and that's a lot of people aren't paying attention to the whole thing with Trump. They are, especially the far, the rabid far left, as I call them, are salivating with Trump being found, quote, guilty of this in this whole Michael Cohen paying off the people, Stormy Daniels and the other one. So if they find Trump, okay, you're guilty, right? And you got to pay whatever or do whatever, or you're going to go to jail or whatever they decide. Even on appeal, that door's been open. And if Trump is guilty for paying for his, and I want to be clear here, if Trump is somehow guilty for Michael Cohen paying Stormy Daniels, then Bill Clinton is guilty for paying the vast swaths of women that he did pay off. So again, massive can of worms. Let's keep our eye on this, and we will be back again with you very soon. I'm Dion.
One more thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't think they're going to rule on this until, the rumor has it that they're not going to rule on this until after the 2024 election.
Yeah,
so we'll
I think
see.
it'll be post-election.
And I'm Shawn, and thank you for coming on. Or thank you for
Absolutely.
letting me on.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll talk to you again real soon. We got more episodes lined up. As always, you can find us on YouTube, X, Rumble, and now on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Music. We're all over, man. We're all over. We're everywhere. Have a good night.
Have a good night.
If you'd like to support the show, please visit our Patreon at patreon.com/Dion's Daily Dose. This has been Dion's Daily Dose, hosted by Dion Bergeron. Executive producers, Shawn Holmgren and Michael Beebe. Copyright 2024. Dion's